As you are probably very aware, I've been answering garden questions here in Northern California for, well, over 30 years, actually. And nobody ever asked me about rhubarb until I visited the eye doctor a few months ago. And besides her questions, which is clear, the first one and the second one or two. Her other question was, can you grow rhubarb here? And nobody in all those years ever asked me about growing rhubarb. And I mentioned that to her, and I said, well, I'll look into it and see what it is. Now, this was back in, about 5 months ago. And since then, what an adventure it has been about the history of rhubarb, the history of rhubarb in California, and how to grow it, and all the varieties. And the short answer to my eye doctor's question is yes, with a few reservations. But to even add more to this story, at a recent gathering of the Master Gardeners of Sacramento County, of which I'm one, I came across a Master Gardener who is growing it here in Sacramento. And she sent me a picture of it. And it is gorgeous. It is growing in full sun, which we'll find out, well, that's chancy. And it's doing great. It's a variety called Success that she found in Australia. We'll get into that, too, because this little voyage with rhubarb is going to take us around the world. Oh, my. It's an amazing journey, so stick around and you'll find out a lot. We are talking with Ronni Kern. Ronni Kern is with the California Rare Fruit Growers Association, and she is down in West Los Angeles for that chapter. And I'm very familiar with the California Rare Fruit Growers here in the Sacramento area. And one thing I know about them, they love to experiment. They love to try new things. That's the whole idea of being a gardener. And the California Rare Fruit Growers Association is full of very curious gardeners. And Ronni is one of those. Ronni Kern also had the same issue I had with, can you grow rhubarb in California? And for years, it was like, no, you can't. It gets too hot here. It doesn't get cold enough in the wintertime. Well, California has a lot of climates. And in fact, in her research about growing rhubarb in California, she discovered that actually it was a thriving crop at one time here. Actually, the ones that were developed that grew here came from a very famous seedsman, and you know him well, Luther Burbank, who farmed in Santa Rosa, which, as you may know, gets rather hot as well, over 100 degrees in the summertime. And he was very effusive about the varieties of rhubarb that he was growing. When I start mentioning this about rhubarb to people, it's if they're from the Midwest, oh, their eyes light up, and because they remember, oh, yeah, I used to love rhubarb pie, fresh rhubarb, jellies and jams. And they're usually from the Midwest or back east, as is Ronni Kern. Ronni, you were born and raised in Rhode Island. And,
actually, I was born in Brooklyn, but I was raised in Rhode Island.
Well, never mind. Okay. Well, that's understandable.
Right.
It sounds like your parents, though, would have no business being in New York, considering how much they loved fruit.
Well, my mother loved fruit. My dad was the one from Brooklyn. My dad was not much of an eater until late in my, well, not late in my life. In my 20s, I did a huge organic garden in Vermont, and suddenly he discovered, oh, vegetables have taste, because he'd grown up, his mother couldn't cook. My mother cooked frozen vegetables. So he basically was not an eater. My mother was. So it was my mother who was the fruit person. My dad, not so much. Steak, a couple of vegetables. That was it. I went to college without knowing what a cauliflower was. I mean, to give you some idea of New England upbringing in the 50s. But no, I mean, fruit was a huge part of my childhood because of my mother and because of New England. I mean, where I lived, a lot of fruit grew there back then. And I guess it still does. I'm not there now, but I've been in California for over 50 years. But
well, it sort of has the same kind of legal history as tomatoes in that it took a court in New York to decide that rhubarb should be considered a fruit because it is primarily used in desserts.
Right. Well, you know, the actual name they used to call it in New England was pie plant, because it was the first thing to come up in the spring when snow was on the ground. So people could make pies out of it. And they considered it definitely a fruit. Though one of my main propagator in the West LA chapter, Charles Portney, actually doesn't use it as a fruit because he is pre-diabetic. So he roasts it and cooks it with onion and garlic and olive oil. And he loves it that way. So you can consider it a vegetable. It is a vegetable. Burbank considered it a vegetable, but most of us consider it a fruit. And the California where fruit grows, all right, we're growing it a fruit. We're calling it fruit. We're not vegetable growers.
It has quite the history here in the United States. Allegedly, Ben Franklin brought it over from France. The history of rhubarb goes back to ancient China, where they found it in the mountains of China. So it has a very good cold tolerance. I think here in the United States, it can grow down into USDA Zone 2, which would be probably where my relatives were farming back in North Dakota. Right. But for the problem with growing rhubarb, though, has to do with summertime heat really can knock it back for certain varieties. And well, tell us about your adventure and how you came upon Luther Burbank and all these other varieties.
Well, when I came to California, I wanted to grow rhubarb. I mean, that's what I grew up eating. And so I go to the nursery, but they sell as Victoria. Victoria, some people can grow, but does not really do well in Southern California. It grows as an annual. You put it in the ground, you get a crop, and it dies. And I was frustrated because it never got really big. It never got really sweet. And rhubarb, actually, if it's good, is sweet. But I gave up on it. Basically, I said, all right, this is not working. I grew other things. And then 4 or 5 years ago, I got cancer. And after that, I said, I got to really figure out rhubarb. Time is limited here. So I started researching, and that's when I came upon Burbank. And his book, Luther Burbank, His Methods and Discoveries, has a big chapter on rhubarb. And where he said it can be grown, could be grown in warm, arid climates. I thought, I need some of that stuff. And I thought, okay, no big deal. He was in Santa Rosa. I'll get some of his roots. Unfortunately, the more I researched, the more I discovered the roots had disappeared. Somebody bought the patent when he died, and then they got moved on, but the land was more valuable for housing development or industrial development. And ultimately, his roots were all plowed under, which broke my heart, broke the heart of David Karp, who was a great writer on fruit, well known around the country. I knew that there were people who must have still had the roots. I bought rhubarb at the farmer's market here from a woman from Valley Center, which is where the last commercial fields were. I have friends who live in Valley Center, but I couldn't find Lainey, and nobody knew about any. They had other varieties, cherry and this and that, but nobody knew if they were actually Burbanks. And so that's when I went back to his book and discovered he'd gone to New Zealand to get the roots. And I couldn't get roots then. It was during COVID. I found this wonderful company, French Harvest in Australia. It's a family that's been growing rhubarb for 4 generations. I actually it's Colin Clayton is the last generation. He wrote a book on rhubarb, which I have in front of me. I started ordering seeds from them, and I passed them out to my members who were interested in propagating. Mostly Charles and I produced most of the plants that have now been spread across Southern California. And people are just going crazy for the stuff because it does grow year round. It does grow in our heat. I do grow it in shade. I have it on my north side of my house where it's happier. But people are growing it almost anywhere. And it's doing really, really well. And we're now in year 4, and it keeps coming. It's perpetual. It doesn't ever really die back entirely. It slows down. This time of year, it's already starting to curl up. Probably September, October, it'll be looking pretty peaked. And then November, when the rains come, hopefully it'll start coming back again. In fact, my big problem is figuring out how to divide roots here, because normally you divide roots when they're dormant in the winter on the East Coast or Midwest or wherever. And we don't really have that season. I'm a stubborn person. I've been researching my whole life. I was a writer my whole life. A lot of my work was historical, and I just got into the habit of doing a lot of research. And so finding Burbank's book on archive.org or the old news articles that would announce his latest discovery. I mean, he grew strawberry flavored rhubarb. He grew raspberry. He was a lunatic. And I don't know how much of it was just hype and marketing and how much of it was real. I don't want to diss Luther Burbank, obviously, but other people were growing rhubarb.
But I can do that. I can diss him for you if you would like. You made a reference to an old newspaper clipping, and you had it posted in one of the West LA CRFG chapter newsletters, which is online. Mm-hmm. And it was from the Los Angeles Herald newspaper of 1904. And
right.
It says, concerning an improvement on the Australian Crimson Winter Rhubarb, so highly prized by all who have used it, Luther Burbank of Santa Rosa answers an inquiry from the California fruit growers as follows. He said, my last new rhubarb is a variety which produces luscious, juicy stalks perpetually throughout the year and which do not have the rank, strong acid taste or, as some express it, ground flavor, which we naturally associate with the older rhubarb. In place of this is a mild but pronounced fruity flavor, very much resembling strawberries or raspberries, so much so that when this rhubarb is once tasted, no one ever cares to taste the old kind. Now there's a salesman.
Right. The wonderful thing about this is something called the California Digital Newspaper, whatever it's called, collection at UC Riverside. So you can find all these old California newspapers in there, including something called the Pacific Rural Press, which goes back to 1905, where they're talking about his Crimson Winter Rhubarb, and it's coming into great prominence in California. And they were growing hundreds of thousands of acres of rhubarb at a certain time in California. They were shipping it all over the country because it was growing so well here. That's what is so heartbreaking. Now there's almost none being grown, just backyard gardeners and a couple of commercial, small scale commercial gardeners.
Yeah, you mentioned David Karp, and he pointed out, I think this was about 10 years ago, so it may have grown since then. He pointed out back then that there's only 4 commercial acres left in California of rhubarb, whereas back in the 1920s and 30s, it was over 1,000 acres.
Right. And, I just gave some roots of my Tina's Noble to Dominic Shaner, who's part of Shaner Farms down in Valley Center, the original place where the roots went. And he works with Gray Martin a lot on growing interesting things. And I'm hoping maybe they're commercial growers. I'm hoping maybe they'll get them going again commercially. But even at the farmer's market, there are maybe 2 people that sell them, and one sells the green stuff, which never gets soft, and you feel like you're eating celery when you're eating it in a dessert. And then this other woman from the Valley Center was actually growing the really good red stuff, but I haven't seen her in years. So I don't think there are very many commercial growers. And which is, it's one of the things that California fruit growers do. We kind of pick up the slack. And the same thing with rhubarb. All right, we're going to get rhubarb growing. I must have, 25 people growing it now around mostly Southern California. I just wrote to a couple.
Do you have any growing it in the Central Valley of California?
I personally don't know. Even though it can handle heat, I would say if you were going to grow it in where you are, I would put it in shade. I would put it either under shade cloth. I actually threw a shade cloth over one of my plants, which is not in shade, and was looking kind of, Some of the people that are growing it here said, gee, it's not looking good. I said, put a shade cloth on it, and it helps. I mean, it makes a huge difference. It seems to be surviving, and it's growing well. And some of these, especially Success, the woman that you talked about, Success is one that I have. It's one of my favorites because it is the sweetest of the ones I grow. And that comes from Sydney, which is actually much more climate like we have down here in Southern California.
Sydney, Australia, we're talking.
Yeah, Sydney, Australia. So whereas the Claytons live in Melbourne, which is further south, which means it gets colder. It definitely gets colder there. And so they brought in, I think Colin brought in seeds from Greenland, for Pete's sakes. Rhubarb he found in Greenland. I don't need that. I don't have a Greenland climate, but I do have a Sydney climate.
For the sake of those who don't know where Valley Center, California is, where is Valley Center, California?
That's outside San Diego. That's North San Diego County. And it's a prime growing area. Most of the avocados come from there. Citrus come. It's a wonderful, wonderful growing area. It's just a really good agricultural area. That's
a rather impolite name then for an area that is close to Eden, calling it Valley Center. But
I don't know where the name came from. It must have been derived from something else. And that's where the last sighting down here of the Burbank roots were.
Well, let's go back to those Burbank roots, because you've been doing updates just about every year on the California Rare Fruit Growers website, newsletter for West LA. You always have something to add every year. And we were talking beforehand that you just discovered that if you go to Santa Rosa to the Luther Burbank Farm and Gardens, and it's in downtown Santa Rosa, they're back to selling the original roots.
Well, they may be. That's what I was told. And their website seems to indicate that they have located them. Whether you can get them today, I don't know. And I've been tempted to call them and say, are you still selling them? But I haven't done that. But yes, 2 different chapter chairs have obtained them from the Burbank.
Do we know what varieties are available?
They just call it Burbank Perpetual. That's the name. I think it's a single variety. Even though he ultimately developed 36 varieties, these are all called just Burbank Perpetual. So I assume that they basically have found one variety, or they're not distinguishing among them. After all this time, I sometimes get sounded on the growing fruit forum for saying, I'm growing Glasgow's Perpetual, or I'm growing this one. They say, well, you're not really, because Glasgow's been dead 100 years, so Lord knows what's happened to those seeds over time. And it's true. And actually, Colin, when he sent me the seeds the first time, he said, grow them up. And if you decide to grow seeds, name them whatever you want. These are going to be your California seeds. And the ones that do best for you, name them what you want to call them, because they'll be specific to your area.
Well, that brings up a very good question about what do these seeds develop as? If you buy the success seed of rhubarb, is it going to come up as success, or because it is a hybrid, it's going to be some combination of a lot of different ones?
They are seedlings. They are seedlings, so they are not going to be 100% true. But I think Colin actually has some statistics in his book. I actually glanced at it this morning, and I can't. But he said basically 50% true. 10% will be even better than they should have been. 10% will be worse than they should have been, and the rest are somewhere in between. So, his suggestion is you grow a lot of them, and that's why he sends you 100 seeds in a packet for like $15. And the ones he keeps telling me to pull out my success because it keeps trying to send up seed pods, and you don't want to send up seed pods because then you lose the energy to the roots, and then you don't get the rhubarb. But it makes the best rhubarb, so I just cut the seeds off. I don't worry about it, and then have the rhubarb. So, but I actually have a Tina's Noble that has now formed 3 different heads. And I'm actually going to separate those out at one point and let one of them go to seed because it is an exceptional plant. And some of the other Tinas I've had they've all been good, but some have not been quite as vigorous as this one. So that's worth perpetuating. I was expecting us just to be planting out roots and selling roots, but if I can get one of these to go to seed, it seems like pretty easy, then yeah, we would try that. Back at the Venice Learning Center at the Venice High School, they have a seed bank, and they're really big on saving seeds that do well for them there. And they do have some rhubarb seeds of just a sort of generic variety. And I looked at them, they're not as big as mine, so I don't care.
But yeah, you really do want to grow the colored variety, like the red leaf rhubarb.
The red ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not the red leaf, the red stalk.
Red petiole, yeah.
There is a red leaf one called Ace of Hearts, but that's really just an ornamental one. You don't need it. It's just a pretty guy. But,
you're right. I should say red stalked.
Red stalk. And but you can. The Glasgow's Perpetual, for example, is a green stalked one. And it's an excellent rhubarb. I just happen to like the red ones. When you cook them up, they stay red, and you don't have this sort of muddy looking whatever compote. You have a nice red compote. You don't have to put cherries or strawberries or raspberries in it. It just is red. I like that. And also, as I said, the success is sweet. The success is a sweet one, sweeter than any of them. I haven't tasted Crimson Sunrise yet. That's my newest one. But Tina's is a delicious one, but it's not really sweet. You have to add sugar to it. Whereas Success, not so much. It's pretty amazing.
I had mentioned that I came across a master gardener here in Sacramento County, Ruth Ostroff, who is growing Success rhubarb in the Sacramento area. The plant is in full sun. She sent me a picture of it. It is gorgeous. It is large, and it strikes me that rhubarb is a crop that is sort of like asparagus. You want to put it at the back of the garden.
Yeah, it's big. It can be, I keep having members say, can I grow this in a pot? And Colin does sell a couple of varieties. I'm actually trying to get one to come up now called Urban Harvest, which is smaller and can be grown in a pot. But these guys, by and large, are big. Crimson Sunrise is huge. He said it needs wind protection. And so you want them at the back of your plot, or in my case, I just have it in its own plot all by itself.
And where it's getting afternoon? You said it's on the north side of the house, so it's getting afternoon shade.
It gets mostly permanent shade. Wintertime it's permanent shade. This time of year the middle of the day gets sun, but it does fine. The leaves do crinkle up a little bit. I mean, my Tina's Noble is starting to turn a little brown on the leaves, but it's doing great.
We should mention who Clayton and Tina are. I mean, they're the ones that are running French Harvest, the seed company, and down in Australia, and they truly are rhubarb heads. And I just ordered a container of rhubarb from them, Ruby Red, and the seeds will be arriving soon. If you can find seeds locally, that would be the way to go, because ordering seeds from Australia, while the seeds are cheap, it's like $10 for 100 grams of seeds, but then there's a $25 shipping charge.
Right. Which is why why this woman in Orange asked me if we could go in together. I bought 4 packages. And the shipping was finally less than the seeds were. But, and also the other reason why I like to order a lot is because the U.S. Postal Service uses, these automated things to cancel the packages, and Tina sends them in an envelope. I've had a lot of seeds arrived crushed. And Tina will, she's great about replacing them, but it's a hassle. You wait months to get them and then they're crushed. And this time I had my Tina's Noble and my Crimson Sunrise just exploded out of the germination beds, and the Urban Harvest and the Success, which has always done well for me, did nothing. And I suspect that they were crushed. It's not anything on the Claytons. They grow great seeds. It's just sometimes the vagaries of getting them in from overseas is if you can get them locally, that would be the best. That's why I'm hoping at some point to start growing seeds. And if your friend, the Master Gardener, who's growing Success, can get seeds off hers, that would be fantastic. And Success goes to seed really easily, so she should be able to do that.
As a matter of fact, I have. So we try many different varieties here. That's what gardeners do. Right. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of planting rhubarb seeds. When do you plant them here in California? How do you care for them?
I basically plant them year round. Since I'm getting mine from Australia, they're coming in. This is their winter. So, fall is when they're harvesting and putting them up. So anytime after I ordered mine in June. I tend to order mine usually around June, partially because we have our plant sale in December every year. So I like to grow them up so we can sell the plants at our plant sale. I tend to be a very conservative person in terms of putting things into the ground. I want them to be really good, strong plants. So I make sure they have a lot of leaves. I basically get them up to 1 gallon pots before I put them in the ground. But I've tried many, many different ways of germinating them. It really depends. Sometimes I used to float them in water. Mm-hmm. on a heat mat until they formed a little seed, and then put them in my standard 1/3 sand, 1/3 perlite, 1/3 peat. I've tried this last batch. I tried some of that. I've just started another batch in what I happened to have around, which was pumice, perlite, peat. And then just one thing that Colin says is that in nature, rhubarb seeds just fall on the ground and germinate. So he says, you don't have to bury them. He says, you can just put them on top of your planting mix and then put maybe a little light something on top. I put some perlite on, mostly because there's a guy in Eagle Rock who germinates really hard seeds from Brazil, and that's what he does. And just a very light coating of perlite, very easy for the plants to come up through, doesn't get them over wet. And then, Colin keeps saying, do not get them too wet, do not get them cold. They do not like that. As I said, some of these things with Tina's I've had like 90% germination. Success, usually I have excellent germination. This time, not so much. And the Crimson Sunrise, also excellent germination.
I didn't soak my rhubarb seeds, as some instructions might imply. There are several states that are facing the same issue we are as far as growing rhubarb. Down in Texas, they have a great publication about growing rhubarb, especially around the Austin, Texas area. And they talk about the fact that you're better off just growing it as an annual because it just gets too hot here in the summertime. And they have fungal issues, too, which can be a detriment to rhubarb because of their higher humidity levels. Whereas here in California, for the most part, we don't have humidity issues. Of course, it depends where you live.
Right. So this year, the humidity has been insane. But I do plant them up a little high. Some places they actually plant the rhubarb on mounds. I think even Colin plants his on mounds so he can walk between the mounds to harvest. Mm-hmm. Any plant that you're worried about root rot, whether it's a tropical tree or perhaps rhubarb, there's no harm in planting it on a mound that sort of protects you from too much water. Mostly I just planted it. I had a birch tree die at the house. It was 100 years old. The birch had been here 100 years. It died. I had the people who took it down, chip it, and leave it there. So the rhubarb was planted in birch chips and did very well there. So
yeah, Colin points out they send a nice little piece of literature with every order of rhubarb seeds, and they mention rhubarb seed hates to be wet and cold. Rhubarb seed should not be treated like other seed. Use high-grade propagation mix. Water once when first sown, then don't water again until the seed starts to germinate in approximately 10 days. Depending upon the air temperature, if the soil becomes really, really dry, then water very lightly if absolutely necessary. I took a chance and I took some of those seeds. I had a blank spot in a raised bed that is in full sun. I scattered some seed. I put on maybe 1/8 of an inch of vermiculite on top of it, and it all germinated within 3 days.
Wow. And that's the ruby red?
That was the success.
The success, yeah. Because the ruby red, we've had a terrible time. I think the smaller the seed, the more likely it is that it's going to get crushed. These are the success from your friend or from Australia?
These are the ones from Australia. I didn't have any. And I grew a second batch of rhubarb seed, the ones from the Master Gardener and the ones that are also from French Harvest. I grew them as suggested in containers, in seed starting mix, in a protected area, and they never sprouted.
Yeah. But that's interesting. So the ones that you planted outside in the sun in a raised bed. My problem is animals eat everything, including my dog. I tend not to start things in the ground because they just disappear.
I mentioned this publication out of Texas, How to Grow Rhubarb Texas Style, and they talk about it as growing it as a winter annual. And so I would think that planting the seeds for that would be similar to what it would be in Texas throughout most of California. And that would be to start those rhubarb seeds in August or September. Well,
again, if you're going to grow it as an annual, you can. I mean, I started this batch. The ones in the garden, I've got Crimson Sunrise and a success of new ones. I planted the seeds in June of 2023. And then I think in July, my granddaughter was here and we potted them out of the little seed things to bigger pots. And then I must have put them in the ground in September. And they're huge now. They're absolutely huge. I tend not to harvest my first year because I want good roots. I want these things to be around. But if you're going to, I could have harvested them if I wanted them as an annual crop. Actually, in all honesty, you can grow them anytime in California because we're not going to get the deep winter. So it's not going to go dormant. And if you're growing them, especially if you're starting them inside, you're not going to get the killing heat when they're just little tiny seedlings. That's the problem for me. If you started them now and put them out in time for the Santa Anas down here. Oh. Do you get Santa Anas up there? I can't remember.
No, we have Delta breezes.
Yeah, my brother lived in Sacramento for decades. And you've got UC Davis up there.
Yes.
So you've got the mothership of growing fruit. You could probably follow the Texas thing and start them in the fall. I just, because of wanting to be able to sell them in December, I start them usually around June, July. And by December, they're definitely big. One of my Charles actually starts his earlier, and then they get too big by December. They've outgrown their pots. I don't like to sell plants that have outgrown their pots.
Talk about how you harvest the leaves, because I understand as you don't cut it, you yank it.
Yank it. And this is a problem because I am not a young kitty cat anymore. And it requires a certain amount of arm strength because you pull it and twist it at the same time. And some of these plants, if they're not really well rooted, you will pull up the whole plant. I have done that with Tina's a couple of times, and that's why I give plants away, because I accidentally pull them out. But you technically don't want to cut them. Though Colin has said, if you have to, you can. It's not going to kill the plant. Again, the big issue if you cut them is the risk of rot. If you left a stub and it rots, then it can affect the plant. But at least down here, and even where you are, it's so dry. We don't really have the same issues with rot that other places have. But the correct way is to pull it and twist it at the same time. And usually there's one way to twist it, and you learn fast because it's different with each stalk, whether you want to twist right or left. And that it signals the roots to grow some more. If you cut it, it doesn't get that same signal to grow some more stalks. So theoretically, you want to pull it and twist it. And I did it as a kid. I just I can't do it so well anymore. And I think also it's just good.
Did you eat the leaves as a child?
No, I was not dumb. I always have people say, "Oh, is that charred? Can I eat the leaves?" I said, "No, the leaves are poisonous. The leaves of rhubarb is full of oxalic acid. Great rust remover if you have a rust, but you do not want to eat it." When I pull the stalks up, I just break the leaves off and drop them right down back in the garden for mulch. Some people say you have to cut down 2-3 inches from the leaves. I don't worry about that.
So what you're preparing in the kitchen then is that petiole, the center part of the leaf, the spine of the leaf.
I just shy away from any mention of eating any part of the leaf because I don't want anybody to die.
So basically you rip off the green part and eat the middle.
Right. Absolutely right.
There. Okay.
And according to Colin, if you catch it in time, when the thing is starting to put up a seed pod, it'll actually have this little lumpy looking thing. He says you can actually eat that too.
Oh, okay.
But I never find it in time. But by the time I see it's already got flowers. And it's like, okay, I got to get this out of here before they sap my root strength.
And if you want a recipe for rhubarb, just ask anybody from the Midwest or back east.
Right. Well, we have a couple on our website, but there's East Coast. It was always strawberry rhubarb pie. I'm sure that's the Midwest too, because those are the two fruits that ripened in spring, and they were both red. And especially if you had green rhubarb, you wanted that nice red strawberry to make it look not quite so disgusting. My husband actually prefers raspberry rhubarb cobbler. And as I said, Charles prefers to roast it and eat it as a vegetable. And most of us who are obsessive are from either the East Coast or the Midwest. And there's a couple of guys from Connecticut who drove all the way up here to get plants for me. I think they've now put in a big order with Colin themselves, because they just really wanted rhubarb. And Steve's always sending me recipes for everything that he finds, beverages and desserts and main courses.
I saw one for snacks for kids where you take that center stem and you chop it into little pieces and you cover it in sugar and serve those little pieces as candy.
Well, when I was a kid, that's what I did. I steal the rhubarb from this neighbor. I was not a good kid, was I? And we'd run to somebody's steps, and with a lap holding a napkin full of sugar in our laps, we would just dip the rhubarb stem in the sugar and eat it. And that was our happiness.
and inexpensive too.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the sugar was cheap back then. Not so much now. Oh, you're kids. Gee.
All right. And there is a very short harvest season, isn't there?
Well, no. See, that's the thing. There's a short harvest season if you are in Rhode Island, because it's a spring crop. But here, no, I've been harvesting. I can't even when I first started harvesting this year. Basically, it starts November, December. I'm still harvesting. In fact, if I hadn't just harvested 200 bananas, I'd be harvesting now. But right now, we're trying to eat our way through the bananas. So I can't do it with the rhubarb. But
and we should point out we're talking in August. So that is, you're talking 8-9 months you've been harvesting from the same plant.
I think that I probably will be able to, I have some big stems out there. I'll probably be able to harvest right into September. And then I'll probably stop September, October. November is when it starts to cool down, and they'll start to, that's probably when I'll start dividing them. I think I got to talk to Colin about when I should do that. And yeah, so it's basically a 9-month, I wouldn't call it entirely perpetual, though I suspect if I had a lot of different varieties under shade, I probably could stretch it out, because Success and Tina's Noble tend to be strong at different times of the year. Crimson Harvest, Sunrise, I don't quite know because it's new to me, but it's looking huge and very healthy. I'm willing to see what it's going to do for me.
Is all that work worth it?
It's not a lot of work. The starting of the seeds is a hassle, just because I'm not a seedy person. I'm not very good with little tiny things. I like to be out there digging big holes. Once you put them in the ground, they're sort of easy to take care of. They don't have bugs. We don't have the diseases. I guess people talk about the fungus. We don't have that. You give them a big, good snack at the beginning of every growing season, whether it's, some people use manure. I don't use animal products, but I use fish bones maybe. Give them a good snack at the beginning of the growing season. That's it. And then you harvest them and you eat them and you or you cook them and eat them, depending on what you want to do.
So one warning that I've seen in several places is don't overwater them.
Yeah, well, you don't want them to rot. You want to water them enough that they don't look wilty. But again, I just have them on the same drip system as the rest of my yard. I water them the same as I water my avocado trees and my lemon trees and my banana trees. Well, my bananas are also on gray water, but everything just basically gets the same amount of water because of California. At least I don't know where you are, but down here we can only water twice a week. It's actually, of all the plants I grow, it's probably the least high maintenance, because once you get the seeds up and in the ground, they do it themselves. You just have to keep an eye out for the seeds. You don't want them to go to seed. That's it.
So the answer to the question, can you grow rhubarb in California, Ronni Kern would give you a resounding yes, you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do not hesitate. Just give them some shade. That's the only thing I would say.
Ronni Kern is with the West Los Angeles, California Rare Fruit Growers Association. We'll have links in the notes today about where you can read her literature. And it's very enlightening. So if you have a relative from back east or you're from back east and you fondly want some rhubarb, well, get to it and start growing it. Ronni Kern, thank you so much for all this great information.
Well, thank you, Fred, for finding me. I have no idea how you did, but you do your research, that's for sure.